Lisa take the show from here.
Thank you so much. Hi, friends. Welcome and happy Wednesday to everybody. I am Lisa Kons with the Minnesota Safety Council. I'm the Traffic Safety Program Manager there. I have worked with them in traffic safety for 27 years, helping to develop, implement, and write traffic safety programming. I have a real passion for traffic safety because I truly believe that by changing the culture we live in and making our roads safer and user-friendly for all road users, helps everybody, and it can potentially save a life. So today we're going to talk about the topic of safer speeds and how that equals being part of healthier communities. I'm going to do a lot of talking, and as questions come in, I will answer all of those that I am readily able to answer. So to get started, I developed a friendly little word cloud here. If I can, I'm not, there we go. Okay, so a lot of words on here: cars, healthier speed, communities, sustainability, equity, pedestrians, bicycle safety. All of these words have to do with what this topic matter is about today. One thing I'd like to point out is injuries resulting from road crashes are still the leading cause of death and disability worldwide in the nation. And even right in our own backyard in Minnesota, traffic crashes are still the #1 incident in the workplace. So I think that is a huge factor in what we're trying to do today. And although safer speeds is one piece of the puzzle that we're going to discuss today, it really takes all of us changing our behaviors and our attitudes while on the road. Approximately 37 to 40,000 people are killed annually in the United States. And how I like to picture that is if you just kind of close your eyes and think of the target field, it's baseball season and we're all back to watching the Twins on TV. That comfortably holds about 38,000 people. That's how many people we kill on our nation's highways every year. You don't get a ticket, you don't get to go watch them, you're just taken. And so we're going to talk today about exposure and population and biking and walking and how to do that safely. Although there's many different factors that are related to all of these things, moving vehicles are the primary cause right now of road crashes and death and injury involving and around them. The transfer of motor vehicles' kinetic energy is a rate that exceeds the human body's protective capacity. So keep those things in mind as we move on. And again, as I'm moving on, just holler if you have any questions. And I want to talk about perception. Unfortunately, in this world we live in today, perception becomes your reality. So as a road user, as a biker, as a driver, as somebody who's out running, it doesn't matter what mode of transportation you're using, whether it has 4 wheels, 2 wheels, 1 wheel, or legs. If your perception is that it's not a safe environment, you're not going to do it. And so when you're talking about multiple modes of transportation and multiple people sharing the roads, one of the examples is, if I don't feel like it's safe for my child to walk to school, instead of walking, I'm going to give my child a ride every day because I feel like that might be safer. From an adult perspective, if I don't feel like it's safe for me to bike or walk or use another mode of transportation to get to work, I'm going to drive. And so what we want to talk about is combining these interventions to encourage that physical activity by making it safe road environment for everybody who uses our roads, including our vulnerable road users. And one of the ways you can do that is by lowering traffic speeds. If I'm a walker, if I'm a biker, if I'm somebody who would rather use one of these other modes of transportation, but I feel like it's not going to be safe for me to cross the street at any crossing, I don't feel like being out on the side of the road is going to be safe for me, I'm simply not going to do it. So our perception becomes a reality, limiting us to the activities that might be able to be utilized in public spaces. So what is roadway safety? It depends on who you ask. If you ask Lisa Kons, who has had a traffic safety hat on for many, many, many years, roadway safety is very data-based. We watch what happens on our roadways. We take crash data and we take injury data and the number of fatalities, and we try to reduce those. And we try to make our infrastructure and our roads safe for all road users. The WHO came back and said, you know what? It reduces the risk of road traffic and injury deaths. But if you go up to somebody in the public and you say, hey, what's road safety? What does it mean to you? You might just come back and say, I need to feel safe on the road that I'm using, whether it's walking, biking, whether it's driving. I want to know that the infrastructure around me is safe and that when I'm on it, I am going to be able to feel safe. And so really think about what road safety means to you. And then take your hat off and think about what road safety means to you in the mode of transportation you're utilizing. Do you feel safe regardless on our roadways using the transportation that you choose? So what is safety on our roadways? So, we've talked about that perception of safety. It becomes a reality. We've talked about what it means to be safe on our roadways. So what determines if a road is safe? Well, in a perfect world, we wouldn't experience crashes between road users. That would be a safe road when there isn't the ability to have any crashes between road users. Unfortunately, that's just not the case. The absence of crashes is an optimal condition. Though what we have to think about, there's a lot of initiatives that have been out there towards zero death campaigns, Vision Zero campaigns. Our goal is zero. We don't want to have any fatalities occur on our roadway systems, zero. And people think, well, they're going to happen. They're crashes just happen. You see it in the paper until it's your somebody, someone. And when it's your somebody, someone, all of a sudden you become extremely proactive when it comes to road safety, whether it's minimizing speed limits, whether it's impaired driving, whether it's crossing the road, it does not matter. But when your somebody, someone is affected, all of a sudden, zero is a number that we think is something we should try to achieve. So we have to be thinking about the challenge that is posed to road safety. And basically, we want to minimize the frequency of crashes, fatalities, and injury on our roads. And one of the easiest things to do when it comes to making roadways safe is reducing speed. Now, I say that reducing speed and driving safer speeds, the speed limit is designed for the stretch of road that you're on. The faster you go, the harder you crash, the more likely you are to die. And when you're a pedestrian, the faster that vehicle is going and the harder it crashes into you, the likelihood of you surviving is reduced incredibly with the amount of speed that vehicle is traveling. So what does safer speeds and public health, how does that all fit together? I mean, what do they have to do with one another? Well, we have to think about it of the underpinning causes of poor health and injury should all work collaboratively. So if people are being killed in crashes, if they're being killed on the roadway, if they're being killed in crosswalks, if they're being killed by disease, it shouldn't matter. We should have a concern regardless of how it is happening. Public health and road safety are linked by factors related to roads such as speed and the volume of traffic, which can cause injuries and prevent opportunities for healthy outdoor activity. So if something is hindering our ability to be active, that is when it becomes a public health issue. We want for our surroundings to be comfortable for all users, regardless of the mode of transportation that they're using. We want to support the safe movement of people and goods. And the other thing that we want to take into consideration is the world around us. And motor vehicles not only can cause injury and fatality, but they are potentially harmful air pollutants, including carbon dioxide and nitrogen dioxide. So it's a pollution control too. When you're lowering speeds and getting out of that vehicle and using other modes of transportation, it can also affect our environment. So I want to show you this slide that we pulled. There's many studies out there on speed within communities and on city roads, decreasing the speed limit on local roads. Here are the immediate impacts, and I've discussed that a little bit. It risks the severity of collision goes down. Perceived pedestrian bicycle safety goes up. So now we have that perceived measure that it's safe for me to be out and about. And time spent in driving and condition. Although a lot of people think, well, gosh, if you're going to slow me down, that means I'm going to be late. And I'm going to get into that a little bit further into this conversation. That's not necessarily true. You're going to have some immediate impacts, property values. When somebody moves into a neighborhood, they want to know that it's a safe neighborhood, that their kids can go outside and play and not have to worry about vehicles speeding by, that they can get on their bike and that they can walk to school. It increases physical activity. It lowers the miles traveled, and it has a positive effect on our air quality. And the outcomes, you know what, that severity and serious and fatal injuries, it goes down. And we're going to get into that too. Just by reducing the speed limit by 10 miles an hour can truly be the matter of life and death for a pedestrian. Chronic illnesses, we'll talk about that, tend to go down too from a pollution standpoint. And if people are being active, we all know that being active is a much healthier, keeps us out of the doctor's office. One thing I want to point out is, did you know that the city of Rochester adopted a complete streets policy in 2009? What does that mean? What's a complete streets? What does that have to do with any of this? Well, complete streets back 10, 12 years ago, what they were there is they sought out to enhance the safety, access, and convenience and comfort for all users, ages, and abilities, including pedestrians, people requiring mobility aids, bicyclists, transit users, motorists, and freight drivers. So the city of Rochester has already wrapped their arms around the idea of we need to be able to share these streets, and we need to be able to share them safely. Through design, through operation, through maintenance, through transportation, through local community engagement, we need to all work together to manage the safety of our community. So now let's fast forward to 2018. There was a survey done in the city of Rochester asking people what their greatest safety concern was. And look at the chart below. Traffic speeding was the main concern in 2018 when this study came out, over drugs, vandalism, identity theft, equality. The city regularly receives complaints from residents about traffic speeds on specific roads, and many of them led to developments and applications of being able, you may have seen some of those speed trailers and speed carts around town, so you kind of get that flashing feeling of when you're speeding. And so the perception within the community after this study was speeds are a little high. People are going too fast through my community and through my neighborhood. Let's fast forward to August of 2019. August is typically a date that new laws in Minnesota go into effect. And the legislators decided, you know what, we are going to allow cities to set speed limits on their streets. We're going to put some confines around it. It has to be done in a consistent and understandable manner. So the community and everybody involved needs to be understanding this, and it has to be consistent. The safety engineer, the traffic engineer, public works needs to be part of this. It needs to be part of the local safety process and the local safety engagements. Signage and communication needs to be appropriate. And you have to have a way within this to communicate the change to the public. And this is typically how all campaigns work when you're implementing a new law. You just don't walk up and all of a sudden, ta-da, here's our new law and let's go. It really, really takes engagement, it takes understanding, and it takes communication from all levels to make the law successful. So why lower speed? It sounds crazy. You're going to slow me down. We're in a fast-paced society. I got to get there, and I got to get there now. And there's many reasons to lower speeds. Number one, it saves lives. And if saves lives isn't enough, that is, and I go back to that whole you're somebody, someone. When you read it in the paper, when you hear about it on the news, when you see it on the news that somebody was injured and or killed, it affects you, but it doesn't pull at your heartstrings like it does if it was somebody that was living in your house, a friend, a family, a partner, etc. They don't necessarily make trips longer, and we'll talk about that. Designing for safer speeds fosters healthy communities, and we've talked about that. People have the ability to get out and about, they have the ability to exercise, and they have the perception that their community is safe enough to do that in, regardless of what mode of transportation they use. They're good for the economy. People who are walking and biking and running have the opportunity to get into high volume areas where there are more shops and more things going on. So it is a more economical and successful. And it's good for the environment. I spoke a little bit about that earlier, and vehicles contribute more greenhouse gases than any other sector in the US right now. That quick acceleration after stopping and the style of stepping on the gas right away when the green light comes. There is more things that come out of from an emission standpoint. And let me just kind of take you back to that whole blame game. You're on the highway, and I'm going to use a highway this time instead of a residential area. We'll get to that. But you're on the highway, and the speed limit is 65. How fast do you go? And I'm not going to ask for a show of hands because I can't see you, but I want you to think about how fast you go if it says 65. And when I do presentations like this, I go all over the state working with employers statewide. I hear 70, 75, 79, 80. When the speed limit's 65. And so it's a very social thing to break the law right now. We are all speeding when you go 1 mile over that posted speed limit. But how many of you have been going 70 in a 65? Or you play that game, 8, I'm great, 9, you're mine. I'm not going to get a ticket because I'm not going, so many miles over the speed limit. And so you're comfortably cruising around, let's call it 75 and a 65, and a car goes by you, whoo, in the left lane. And you think to yourself, oh, my Lanta, look at them speed. Could they be going any faster? Whoa, hold on. We're both speeding. It's just we put that hat on that makes it okay for us to do it because we're the safe one. We're speeding safe. Now let's fast forward to the difference of that highway and the residential. You're in a 30-mile-an-hour zone. 35, you have people crossing in front of you, you have kids playing, you have people walking all over the place, and all of a sudden you're going 39 or 40. Are you going to have the ability and the distance to stop your vehicle before hitting what's ever in front of you, or before hitting a child that runs out in the front of the street? And so we're going to talk about how those speed limits right now can affect that. 20 mile per hour is the difference of a pedestrian dying. It increases that by 13%. So if you go from the bottom up, at 40 miles an hour, 73% of peds will die or suffer a severe injury at 40 miles an hour. You really, really have a tough chance against getting hit at 40. You move up to that 30 mile an hour and about 40%. You go to 20 miles an hour and 13%. So you can look at this data right here. And if I was a gambling girl, I would probably want to be hit by a car going 20 or less than at 40 miles an hour. It just makes good sense. In addition to the fact that you also have to take into whom it is crossing. If it's a healthy person who is out there, is it an elderly person? Is it somebody in a wheelchair who might already be disadvantaged? Those percentage rates are going to change. Is it a child and somebody who's more frail? Those percentages are going to change. So in a residential area, you want to put that hat on with, I'm trying to get to from point A to point B, but I'm trying to do it as safely as I possibly can. How many times do we just get on our bike or in our car and think, oh, I'm going to go from A to B? And we don't really think about how am I going to get from A to B? How am I going to get there as safe as possible? Speed and safety also creates, go ahead, you have a question?
Yeah, there's one question or a couple that we had in the chat here, Lisa.
Yeah,
are there cities in Minnesota that have implemented lower speeds that are seeing safety or safer environments for people to live, work, and play? And
yes.
Are they seeing greater traffic congestion for that reason?
There's a couple different studies, and that's great. We are going to actually get into that. St. Paul and Minneapolis were the first out to lower their speeds down to 20. And the city of Minneapolis has what's called Vision Zero. And the biggest goal within their Vision Zero is to get those speed limits down, reducing pedestrian fatalities. And so we're going to get a little bit into that later in the presentation, and we're going to recap some of the data. These things have just occurred. The statute was just changed in 2019. So although I did have the ability to have conversations with the leaders in those areas, the data still hasn't really come out yet. They're still doing some benchmarking and some data, but I will share with you in just a little bit. What I also want to point out is in terms of distracted driving and other things that are going on our roads, it's not just speed. There's impairment, there's distraction, there's a number of things going on. And one thing that happens when you're distracted is you lose that peripheral vision. When you're speeding, the same thing happens. You lose that peripheral vision. You lose that ability to see things on the right and the left-hand side. And this next slide shows that the faster you go, the less you see. You see what's right in front of you. You don't have the ability to see what's around you. When you pay attention and you drive at safe speeds or the speed limit or below the speed limit, you have that ability to take in what's around you. Is there someone jumping out in front of you? Is it an animal? Is it a person? Regardless of what the what is, you've got the ability to see, which gives you the ability to react. Speed and stopping distance, I made that comment earlier. Are you going to have the time to stop? This is what happens at certain speeds. So if you're going 40 miles an hour or faster, you really have to think about how long is it going to take me to stop? We all know that at 10 or 15 miles an hour, when you stop on the brake, you have a faster reaction time. The higher the speed, the less the reaction time and the longer it takes you to stop. So that's part of the difference here with safer speeds and lowering your speed limit. We're at 20 miles an hour. It's going to give us the ability to stop faster. When you get up into those 30 and those 40 miles an hour, you're applying the brakes, but that velocity is still pushing you forward until your car or your vehicle actually stops. Higher speeds make crashes more likely to happen, and they make more likely to happen, and they result in injury or death. Lower speeds, you have the ability to survive that crash if you are hit at a lower speed. And I'd also like to bring up older pedestrians. One thing we need to talk about too, our communities and our median age is growing. I work with a number of different projects and programs dealing with the aging driver and modes of transportation and making those modes of transportation readily available. Older persons want the ability to be able to walk. They want the ability to feel safe, whether they're using transit or getting over to transit. But at the same time, there's other issues that come into play. They're frailer. So even if you look at a diagram that shows teen drivers versus the older driver, and we put them in buckets, their crash and fatality rate really mirror each other. And it's not that one is a bad driver. Sometimes we always think, oh, mature drivers are bad drivers. That's not the case, friends. What it is they're more frail. And their chance of living through a crash and or an incident isn't near as high as somebody who is younger. There's other issues. They have peripheral issues, they have cognitive. Sometimes judging speed is very difficult. And we have seen that in data that has come out with peg crashes. They go to walk across the street or the roadway and they don't realize how fast that car is coming at them. So there's a number of different things that come in as the age goes up. It's not that we're picking on one demographic or the other. It's just that these are the things that happen once we age. Here's the breakdown that says speeds don't necessarily make trips longer. At 15 miles an hour, 55 mile speed limit, 10 miles over the speed limit, about a 2-minute savings. You really put these 2, 4, 5-minute savings on top of what it is, from a life perspective. And it just really doesn't make a whole lot of difference. One thing that I work with employers, we do parking lot reconstruction. And they'll ask us to come in and look at the parking lot because between, let's say start time is 8 o'clock, from 5 minutes to 8 until 10 after 8, there were a number of incidents happening within parking lots, pets being hit, going up on curbs, property damage. And so really we got to the point where you slow those speeds down, and instead of calling them late at 5 after 8, how about between 8 and 8:10, they're still on time. It's about having butts in seats safely. So we work with employers on things like that as well. So we talked about, are there other people? Well, yes, there are other people who have done this. Rochester is one of a couple of different cities who have decided, we need to tackle this for the good of our community. St. Paul had a modal hierarchy. As I mentioned, they adopted the Vision Zero strategy, which Vision Zero has been determined to eliminate all traffic fatalities and severe injuries while increasing safe, health, equitable, and mobility for all. First implemented in Sweden, and it took off like fire, nationwide, countrywide, worldwide, and now it's starting to really gain momentum in American cities. They want to make sure that all road users are safe, especially the vulnerable groups, and that it accommodates all modes of travel. Starts with ordinance change. And we talked about that. And this is St. Paul and Minneapolis here. And these are some of the things that happened within their ordinance. Basically, it defines how the city will use the legislative authority that was given. It aligns technical analysis and speed. And so I really want to hit on this piece here. When cities decide, you know what, this is what we're going to do, they didn't just throw a dart at a dartboard and say, hey, this is what we're going to do and this is how it's going to work. There is a lot of stuff that goes into this. And one of those things is goals. They set the goals and they do speed studies and they do evaluation studies. What's happening on this stretch of road and this flow and this crosswalk and what's going to make it more safe and what speed might be the adjusted speed here that is going to make sense for all the road users. And you have to remember this is for everybody. So for all road users, not just vehicles, not just cars. If you've ever had the ability to go downtown St. Paul at 8 o'clock in the morning, there are people on all modes of transportation. So take this to a residential area and it's the same thing. We want to make sure that people are being able to get from A to B safe. And that's basically what St. Paul and Minneapolis did. They put together a plan. Public works, community, leaders, grassroots initiatives. What are the issues? What does the community think? What can we do to work together? And then there's collaborators, and you can see Rochester was one of the collaborators on there, as well as Ramsey County, West St. Paul, Maplewood, and this is really, really taking off because this truly is smart for communities. That technical evaluation is essential. You want to know, you want to go through all sorts of research, you want to do your literature reviews, you want to find out what's worked from other cities that are the same size. You want to learn lessons from other cities. So as that one person commented, are there some other cities that have done this? St. Paul had some pretty big prototypes and pilot studies that took place before implementing their speed limits, and we're still learning as to what's coming out of those. The National Transportation Board in 2017 did a report on reducing speed. So when speed is set throughout cities and states and counties, about the 85th percentile is what's using given traffic flow. So that's kind of what's been used. Now we're going into these urban areas, and what we're happening is, or what's happening or what we're seeing is that the manual on uniform traffic control devices are being changed. And this is part of the literature review that Minneapolis and St. Paul did. They went about this from a safe systems approach. Well, what does that mean? In a safe systems approach, the casual factor leads to an injury or collision are seen as interlinked. So there's things that we need to do for the community, the roads, and then those people who utilize them, and we all have to work together. The key concept in a safe systems strategy is that roads should be designed, managed, maintained to prevent fatal and serious injuries from occurring, and that road users also are educated on that. So that's the safe, kind of a safe systems approach, and that's the approach that a lot of organizations and communities are using when it comes to lowering speeds. As I mentioned, the National Committee on Uniform Traffic Control, they have established that perhaps setting those speeds and changing those speeds by 5 to 10 miles is a good thing for our city and residential areas. Another association that did a great report with lowering speeds in slow zones was the National Association of Transportation Officials. So this goes very, very in depth when it comes to lowering speeds and making the infrastructure safer for all of us. And then, of course, the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety said that lowering the speed limit from 30 to 25, and this particular study was done in Boston, it improves safety, and it is an effective countermeasure in saving lives and making for healthier communities.
Hey, Lisa, there's a quick question we had in the chat is of whether the Minnesota Safety Council is working with local Rochester employers on speeding and or traffic safety.
Oh, yes. Thank you for that question. I go out and do trainings all over the state, and I had the opportunity to work with some of the most fabulous employers down in Rochester, and some of them were on a call that I had earlier this week that are constantly asking for ideas and suggestions on how to keep their employees safe. And it just, it's such a great thing for employers to engage in traffic safety, even if they don't have a fleet of cars. And so what I always do with employers is I remind them, even if you don't have a fleet, the most dangerous thing your employees are going to do is commute to and from work every day. So you want to educate them, and you want to make sure that they're doing that safely, whether it's in a vehicle, whether it's on a bike, whether it's walking or running. And so, yes, I have had the opportunity to come down and do a significant amount of training with employers in Rochester. Lessons learned from other cities. New York has lowered the default speed to 25 miles an hour, and you can see on here Portland, Seattle. And so this is some of the case studies that Minneapolis and St. Paul used when creating theirs. Their St. Paul study, here you go. Somebody had asked about Minneapolis. Non-motorized users were involved in about 3% of total crashes, but 33 of them were involved in crashes that were serious. 33% were involved in crashes that were serious. And so here's some of the benchmark data that had come out. And the bottom line is speed was an identifying factor in most of these fatal and high injury crashes. And that's no different than Minnesota right now. Speed is the leading contributing factor right now still to fatalities statewide in Minnesota, and it has been for a while in single vehicle crashes. We're in a different world right now. I'm still giving this PowerPoint presentation, and speed. Our vehicle miles traveled has gone down significantly since the COVID epidemic. And one thing I would like to point out to you, though, is although our vehicle miles traveled has gone down significantly, and significantly is to the 20 to 30%, our crash rate has risen. And so you would, as a traffic safety professional, we would like to see that number have gone down with our vehicle miles traveled. Pedestrian incident and fatalities has risen. We are 5 more fatalities ahead of where we were on this day last year. So with less miles being traveled, that's a real struggle, and it's a sore thumb sticking out to traffic safety professionals on what we're going to do about that. And then another tidbit too, the Minnesota State Patrol between April and the end of June wrote out over 300 citations for vehicles going 100 miles an hour or more. 300 citations in just that small stretch of time. That's the State Patrol. We haven't received city data yet, but they have also said that they've seen an increase in speed in the city data. And now that's where there's more traffic, more crosswalks, more families, more people, more children utilizing our infrastructure. So I just wanted to point that fact out too.
Lisa, we got a couple other questions real quick.
Go ahead.
So a follow up to the working with local Rochester employers, are you aware of them advocating for change around speed limits?
That conversation has not been had yet. When I work with them, we just talk about, depending on the topic, but we'll talk about, I have speed as part of it. So it might be impaired driving and speed and belts and distraction. And so we're educating on the basis, not necessarily work around whether or not they're advocating for or against. That's not a conversation that's taken place yet. The conversation has really been about protecting your most valuable asset, your employee, whether they're at work or at home, and making sure that they get to and from work. We pay our employees to work. The fun they have there is the icing on the cake, but we want for them to go home, and we want for them to have healthy, happy life and see their loved ones and come back. So that's really kind of what it's talking about.
Great. Yeah, thank you. There's one other question.
Sure.
It's kind of getting at the connection between reducing speeds and alternative transportation.
Yep.
Are you aware of communities that have enacted slower speeds? Will alternative non-motor vehicle transportation, or are they embraced, like bikes, scooters, that kind of thing?
Is the alternative transportation embraced?
Mm-hmm. Or does slower speeds have any relationship to the use of alternative transportation?
Yes. And it goes back to that perception. When your perception is it's not safe for me to walk or bike or be on a scooter, it's not going to take place. You don't feel comfortable doing it. And that's in many modes of our life. If your perception is slower speeds are going to create the ability for me to use that space with other road users safely, yes, they have increased. And so as speeds are lowering, there's more walkers, there's more bikers. But again, you have to remember these things have just, I'd like to say, oh, the data out there is just coming in threefold. We're just starting to receive data because the benchmark has been set, and these implementations have only been around for less than a year. Now, when you look at data from other areas and other states, New York is a great example, and of course, a completely different community. But they've had Vision Zero around and walk, ped, bike issues for years. And the data with lowering the speeds is just tremendous. And I can follow up with reports and some literature review if anyone's interested.
There's one other question, I think, as a result of the best practice sharing from other cities.
Yep.
Once cities lower their speed limits, what can they do to ensure people drive those speeds?
That's just like speed limits. That's a great question. And you have to really communicate, and that's just like implementing a rule or regulation or a policy within the workplace. You know what? I'm going to sneeze, so I apologize in 2 seconds. So when you do any kind of a change, it is so important on a community level to not just come out and say, okay, this is what we're going to do, and here's the new speed limit. You want to have all sorts of communication channels, whether it's social media, whether it's on television, whether it's through local channels of communication within your communities, to let this know, A, it's happening. Ask people to be part of it from the ground zero and from grassroots up. And then from an enforcement perspective, there is going to be typically hand in hand when you have engineering and enforcement and education and some of these things that work together. But you don't want for the lowering of speed limits to have this enforcement presence. You want for it to be something that the city is going to welcome and that they're just going to do because it makes good sense. But there is different things and different expectations that will come with it, like enforcement. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone's going to be out ticketing. That's not what this is about. And it's the same truly, when you lower the speed limit, it's the same. The education of it being lowered is important, but it doesn't matter if you're out on the highway and you see 65 and you drive 70 or 75. There needs to be a culture change. And the culture change starts really, truly with each one of us. Are we driving the appropriate speed limits? And that means safely. Driving for conditions, just because it says 25, it might be safer for us to drive 20. It might be safer for us to drive 15, depending on the weather conditions, depending on the light conditions, depending on the conditions of the road. So I always tell people speed limits aren't suggestions. They're not suggestions, they're limits, and that's what they're designed for. So when it comes to following the law and implementing the law, it really is about the education model, changing the culture. We are changing the speed limits because we want for our culture and our community to be safer, and we think that this is going to help us be safer. And then it just takes time. It really does. I was a huge proponent and helped with the hands-free law. And over time, we saw some numbers shifting, and then you have to really go back, and you can't lose sight of what the issue is. You just can't. So you got to continually educate. And that is my work with employers too, is that education model.
We do have a couple other questions, but I think
go
it's
ahead.
pretty close. You already read? Okay. One was about case studies about automated electronic enforcement.
Oh, yes.
And how those have gone. And then I'll follow up the other questions kind of on a separate topic.
Automatic enforcement. There are a couple different pilot projects that are going to be potentially taking place here in Minnesota in work zones. And so we have to keep in mind from an automatic enforcement standpoint, that's not about, it's about slowing speeds down in high profile areas. And so a lot of times it gets confused with red light running, and that's not the case. Automatic enforcement is proven to be very successful. Massachusetts, Portland, there's some states that have had great success. Arizona is one of them with automatic enforcement. It does slow the traffic down in areas where they know it's high profile enforcement. So with the concept of towards zero death that I talked about earlier, we know that enforcement with education and community involvement and EMS together there's no way to enforce our way out of any one issue. Education and enforcement combined really helps. So thanks for that question on automated enforcement, but from what we're seeing right now, it is a great tool to add to the infrastructure.
Great, yeah, thank you. And then one other question that came through is kind of getting in the note of how to have conversations with drivers that might be speeding through neighborhoods. Do you have some tips or tactics
Sure.
that community members can use? And then what are other actionable things that folks on this call that this is resonating with can act upon?
Absolutely. You know, the more positive you can be, the better off you are. Unfortunately, when somebody is speeding through a neighborhood, that defense mechanism goes up because, you know, I'm a mom and Mama Bear comes out and I want to scream, you know, slow down, and we want to be defensive. If it's somebody you know, to have those conversations, the more positive you can be with data-driven and facts and safe benchmarks. I've always told people, when we start talking about traffic safety, and I've been in traffic safety for 27 years, so it's really hard for me to talk about anything other because I'm so passionate about it, and I really do think that it can save lives. So when having this conversation, it's about sharing with them. The faster you go, the harder you crash, the more likely you are to die. Driving slower speeds truly can be the matter of life or death. And I want to point out too, we need to take into consideration the person behind the wheel. Nobody, not one person I know ever gets up and says, today's the day I want to have a crash. Today's the day I want to kill a pedestrian. Today's the day I want to get hit by a car. We don't plan our day that way, but we have the ability to control the behaviors when we get in a vehicle or any mode of transportation. And so it's really starting, and I have some other tools and guidelines that I'd be more than happy to share with how to start that conversation, because there's a lot of people who are really passionate about, you know, if I want to go 5 miles over the speed limit or 10 miles, turn your blind eye, I'm going to do it. But when you dig into the data and the facts and you find out that you're not really saving that much time and that it's a matter of life and death, the conversation tends to go a little bit quicker and easier. This picture here is what Minneapolis passed out. 20 is plenty. These were yard signs all over. Paid social media, use social media to get the message out. Community and grassroots is a phenomenal way to get the message out. And I also want to point out that on this call today, and I believe popping up maybe in the chat, there are free slow down yard signs that can be utilized from AAA, and there is a website that you can get those from. So if you would like to get a slow down yard sign for your community, your neighbors, your friends, your family, please feel free to go to that link and then get your yard sign. So there are ways that you can go about in a positive way to get this message out. Evaluate, and that's one thing that Minneapolis and St. Paul will do, and that's another thing you always want to do with any project or program you put into place, is make sure that what you're doing is working and come back with the data and be ready to share the data. So you know what, why lower speeds? I'm going to go right back to the beginning. Because it saves lives, because it fosters healthier communities, because it's good for the economy, because it's good for the environment, and because it's great for our community. As I mentioned, as business employers, we do the best we can to give our employees the tools to do their jobs safely. We want them to go home. We implement policies. You can't drink, you can't use alcohol, you want to be able to lock and take out your equipment. It is the same thing, because those employees live in our communities. So we want to make our communities safe for our most valuable asset, and those are the people who live there. We want for them to be able to live, drive, work, and play safety by providing an infrastructure and a culture that allows them to do those things. And lowering the speed limit is one piece of the safety puzzle that can make that happen. And so I will leave you with this. Here's my safety puzzle for the day. There's a lot of things that we can put into place. And with that, I will take a few more questions if you have a few more questions. If anyone has any.
Great. Thank you, Lisa, for this presentation. It was very informative. I think we covered a lot of the questions in here thus far. So if there are folks that have other questions as a result of the presentation or anything else that they'd like to ask Lisa, feel free to type them in the meeting chat here.
There's my contact information too. If anyone has any follow-up questions, comments, feel free to reach out to any of us. They can funnel me questions if you have follow-up questions.
Sounds good. I just did want to reinforce the sign link. Jay shared the link in case anyone wants to request a sign, as well as the link in order to do that. So that's the latest mention in the chat. You can follow up with that appropriately. One new question we just had, Lisa,
Sure.
How about buy-in when groups are opposed? Like, how do we build community support for this topic?
Oh, that's a great question. I love that question. Okay, so involve them, get them in at the table. And I talk about that from a business perspective too. When you're implementing policies or procedures, take that naysayer and the person who's talking the loudest and have them at the table and find out why. The biggest piece of that puzzle is why. Why the negativity? Why do you not want this? You know, where can we meet halfway? Where's that benchmark where we can meet halfway? So when it comes to building buy-in and support, it's really a two-way conversation. There's a lot of listening that needs to go on from both people. Hear them out. I think that lowering the speed limit is going to ABC, and then talk about why it might not or may help or hinder that conversation. And I do have a presentation and a PDF that I'd be more than happy to share on having that conversation.
Thanks, Lisa. Any other questions as we wrap up? Oh, the follow-up is what happens when they don't show up to that conversation?
Well, if it's a community conversation, it's one thing. You know, you can, if you build it, they will come. That doesn't mean that they're going to come. So one thing I would highly recommend is, you know, with any policy implementation, you're going to have pros and cons. You can focus on getting those people to the table that are in support and working with the people that are on the fence, and then those people that are completely against. It's educate, 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 educate. So if they don't show up and you don't feel like you're breaking through, then move on to the next that you know that you might have a chance on getting through and getting them. I am going to let you know when it comes to policy, when it comes to change, peer influence, neighbors, friends, family, those people can help change minds.
Excellent. Yeah, you're getting a lot of kudos in the chat now, but not as many questions anymore. So maybe last opportunity for questions. Otherwise, I think we're moving towards wrapping up here.
Sounds good. Well, thanks for having me. Y'all have a safe day and drive safe and get from A to B safe.
Yes, thanks, Lisa. I'll follow up with the group on sharing this link to the webinar as well as the slides.
Okay.
So I'll follow up with the group. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Lisa, and have a great Wednesday.
Thank you. You too.
All right. Bye, everyone.